Wir sind ganz vorbereitet, ja? Okay, I'm going to do my intro. I'm delighted to say that our next author is Philip Hensher, whom I've known for many a long year, actually. I first met Philip in the late 80s, was it, perhaps? When I was incredibly young, I mean more or less younger than him, actually, incredibly young academic, and very, very keen, and Philip turned up at my university in Cambridge to do a PhD on sort of Horace Walpole and sort of, wasn't it Horace Walpole?
I'm happy to say that a great fog of oblivion has
Oh, right. There is a fog of oblivion because as I remember it, I did actually teach Philip for a while, which is, or at least I was in the same room as him whilst a teaching encounter took place, because it is certainly the case that I remember him being already far better read than I was as a young lecturer. But a fog of oblivion has descended because Philip claims that he was never my student, because that would be a little bit too sort of humiliating to think that he was. But he was. And then he very wisely saw that academic life was not for him, things were much more interesting elsewhere. And as well as becoming a novelist and a reviewer, Philip sort of, like a few people, actually treats reviewing as though it's a kind of wonderful, enjoyable, worthwhile activity in itself. And anybody who's read one of his reviews will know that you will almost always disagree with it, but you will always get to the end of it and enjoy it, unless perhaps you're the author he's reviewing. And he became a clerk in the House of Commons. This is right, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
And wonderfully, now don't contradict me here, Philip, wonderfully was sacked for writing a novel in which the House of Commons features. Is that not true?
I was the first person to be sacked from the House of Commons since 1837.
Very good. But also, mate, if I say as a kind of literary historian, I think it's great to be sacked for writing a novel, isn't it? And I think many literary academics kind of actually in their hearts look back nostalgically to times and places where publishing a book would actually make people so angry that you would lose your job or be kicked out of university or even maybe being executed. But that actually the thought that fiction might make such a difference is a very kind of enlivening one. Philip is... he's got a novel just about to come out, is that right?
Yep.
Called Scenes from Early Life, and he's going to read a little bit of that later, I think. And also, his Swatty past, I don't know what the German for Swatty is, but Swatty, his scholarly past, is resurfacing in the autumn because he's written a book, or is writing a book, about the history and future of handwriting, which has got some German examples in.
Yes.
So he's a man of all parts, as you can see. And the format of each of these sessions with our individual authors is that they have to open with, they've been instructed by me to open with a reading of Dickens, whose relevance to their own writing we're then going to talk about. And they all sent me their readings in advance very diligently. And I then studied them and prepared some intelligent questions. And Philip, about 6 minutes ago, informed me he's changed his mind about his particular reading. And so the cast-iron case on Bleak House and its opening that I had prepared has all gone. And Philip's going to read to you instead from our mutual friend, whose plot I'm rummaging in my memory to recall. So, do you want to stand to do it? Yes. But he's going to explain what it's all about, I hope.
Yes, I will. I would love to know what the German word for Swatty is. I suspect it... Streber. Okay, I'm very pleased to hear it. I thought it...
Streber, it's pejorative, yes? Unkind.
Okay. I thought it might be one of those things like the French language not having a word for shallow.
No.
Is that true?
Yeah, you can't say in French. I may be corrected here, but you can't say that a river is shallow in French.
I'm sceptical about that one, but anyway.
Okay.
We'll go a bit of Googling in the lunch hour, I think.
Okay. I will be corrected by people who know better than I do. Now I'm going to read a little bit from Our Mutual Friend, and Our Mutual Friend is the novel, I think, where Dickens just wants to see how unlikely he can make a plot and still keep it going, and it's wonderful. And what happens is a girl called Bella Wilfer is adopted by a suddenly rich pair of rather amiable idiots who live on a rubbish heap. And she's adopted as their heir, and her parents, not unnaturally, greatly resent this. And her mother I can only describe as somebody who thinks that she ought to be treated like Frederick the Great in a frock. And she's very cross about this and keeps striking attitudes. But the wonderful thing about it is that in the middle of this, there is a wonderful human relationship, which is the one between Bella and her rather ineffectual father. And the bit I'm going to read is where Bella leaves her ghastly mother at home, goes to pick up her father and takes him out for a slap-up lunch with 50 quid that the awful boffins have sent her. I probably ought to explain a single item of vocabulary which you might not be familiar with, which is the word saveloy. And a saveloy is possibly the worst sausage that you could conceive of or imagine. It's bad. It's a bad sausage even in England, the country of quite bad sausages. It begins with Bella being called for by the boffin's secretary. The front garden gate clanked, and the secretary was seen coming at a brisk pace up the steps. "Leave me to open the door to him," said Mrs. Wilfer, rising with stately resignation as she shook her head and dried her eyes. "We have at present no stipendiary girl to do so. We have nothing to conceal. If he sees these traces of emotion on our cheeks, let him construe them as he may." With those words, she stalked out. In a few moments, she stalked in again, proclaiming in her heraldic manner, "Mr. Rokesmith is the bearer of a packet for Miss Bella Wilfer." Mr. Rokesmith followed close upon his name, and of course saw what was amiss, but he discreetly affected to see nothing, and addressed Bella. "Mr. Boffin intended to have placed this in the carriage for you this morning. He wished you to have it as a little keepsake he had prepared. It's only a purse, Miss Wilfer, but as he was disappointed in his fancy, I volunteered to come after you with it." Bella took it in her hand and thanked him. "We have been quarrelling here a little, Mr. Rokesmith, but not more than we used. You know our agreeable ways among ourselves. You find me just going. Goodbye, Mamma. Goodbye, Lavvy." And with a kiss for each, Miss Bella turned to the door. The secretary would have attended her, but Mrs. Wilfer, advancing and saying with dignity, "Pardon me, permit me to assert my natural right to escort my child to the equipage which is in waiting for her," he begged pardon and gave place. It was a very magnificent spectacle indeed to see Mrs. Wilfer throw open the house door and loudly demand with extended gloves, "The male domestic of Mrs. Boffin," to whom, presenting himself, she delivered the brief but majestic charge, "Miss Wilfer, coming out," and so delivered her over like a female lieutenant of the Tower relinquishing a state prisoner. The effect of this ceremonial was for some quarter of an hour afterwards perfectly paralysing on the neighbours, and was much enhanced by the worthy lady airing herself for that term in a kind of splendidly serene trance on the top step. I just want to pause there and prostrate myself before Mrs. Wilfer just fanning herself gently to show off that she's handed her daughter into an expensive coach. When Bella was seated in the carriage, she opened the little packet in her hand. It contained a pretty purse, and the purse contained a banknote for £50. "This shall be a joyful surprise for poor dear Pa," said Bella, "and I'll take it myself into the city." As she was uninformed respecting the exact locality of the place of business of Chicksey, Veneering and Stobbles, but knew it to be near Mincing Lane, she directed herself to be driven to the corner of that darksome spot. Thence she dispatched the male domestic of Mrs. Boffin in search of the counting-house of Chicksey, Veneering and Stobbles, with a message importing that if R. Wilfer could come out, there was a lady waiting who would be glad to speak to him. The delivery of these mysterious words from the mouth of a footman caused so great an excitement in the counting-house that a youthful scout was instantly appointed to follow Rumty, as her father. Rumty observe the lady and come in with his report. Nor was the agitation by any means diminished when the scout rushed back with the intelligence that the lady was a slap-up gal in a bang-up chariot. Rumty himself, with his pen behind his ear under his rusty hat, arrived at the carriage door in a breathless condition, and had been fairly lugged into the vehicle by his cravat and embraced almost unto choking before he recognised his daughter. "My dear child," he then panted incoherently, "good gracious me, what a lovely woman you are. I thought you had been unkind and forgotten your mother and sister. I've just been to see them, Pa, dear. Oh, and how did you find your mother?" asked R.W. dubiously. "Very disagreeable, Pa, and so was Lavvy." "They are sometimes a little liable to it," observed the patient cherub, "but I hope you made allowances, Bella, my dear." "No, I was disagreeable too, Pa. We were all of us disagreeable together. But I want you to come and dine with me somewhere, Pa." "Why, my dear? I've already partaken of a... if one might mention such an article in this superb chariot, of a saveloy," replied R. Wilfer, modestly dropping his voice on the word as he eyed the canary-coloured fitting. "Oh, that's nothing, Pa." "Truly, it ain't as much as one could sometimes wish it to be, my dear," he admitted, drawing his hand across his mouth. "Still, when circumstances over which you have no control interpose obstacles between yourself and small German sausages, you can't do better than bring a contented mind to bear on saveloys." "You poor good Pa. Pa, I do beg and pray, get leave for the rest of the day and come and pass it with me." "Well, my dear, I'll cut back and ask for leave." "But before you cut back," said Bella, who had already taken him by the chin, pulled his hat off and begun to stick up his hair in her old way, "do say that you're sure I'm giddy and inconsiderate, but have never really slighted you, Pa. My dear, I say it with all my heart, and might I likewise observe," her father delicately hinted, "that perhaps it might be calculated to attract attention, having one's hair publicly done by a lovely woman in an elegant turnout in Fenchurch Street." Bella laughed and put on his hat again, but when his boyish figure bobbed away, its shabbiness and cheerful patience smote the tears out of her eyes. "I hate that secretary for thinking of me," she said to herself, "and yet it seems half true." So someone ought to write an article about men whose hair stick up in Dickens.
Do you think that's a thing?
I think I came up in Claire's.
Yes, it did. Yes.
So
why did you choose that?
I think that one of the interesting things about Dickens is that he's writing for the first time in a huge city where you can't possibly know everybody. And for that reason, he's very, very acutely aware of the external signs of human beings, how they present themselves, how they're judged by other people, the conclusions that people come to about human beings. And I think this is a big change in the English novel. If you think about, there's something very strange in Jane Austen, that sometimes the external signs of a human being don't seem to matter. In Pride and Prejudice, the letter, you remember, that Jane Bennet sends to her sister about telling her that Lydia's run off with Wickham, Elizabeth comments that it's very ill written. We know that Jane Bennet's got very bad handwriting. That doesn't seem to matter because actually we don't interpret people by external signs in the world of Jane Austen. All you need do is speak to somebody who knows that person, and they'll tell you whether they're any good or not. Yeah. Now, in the vast city of Dickens, suddenly we're in this world where we have to judge and read people. We have to judge their externals. What does it mean that our Wilfer has a rusty hat? What does it mean that who's that inventor in Little Dorrit who has a peculiar motion of the thumb? We know that he's an engineer because of that peculiar motion of the thumb. So for me, the way in which that passage unfolds is the ways in which Mrs. Wilfer is actually obsessed with presenting herself, presenting a facade. She wants to be read in a way that she can control. Wilfer, when she gets to him, he's being read by his colleagues, by the people that see them in Fenchurch Street. There's a lovely woman ruffling his hair in Fenchurch Street. He knows that that's going to be misinterpreted. It's all about kind of signs and wonders and externalities. And for me, that's what makes Dickens such a wonderful, rich novelist. Not that he goes into people's heads, but he goes into the appearance of things with such richness and variety.
People complain sometimes that sort of makes him a sort of connoisseur of grotesquerie, that he's so keen that you recognise somebody. I mean, in my intro, I talked about people's speech, but also, like you say, there are little kind of things about people. The man in Great Expectations who brings news to Pip, and of his great expectations, and he looks as though he's squinting down the barrel of a gun.
Yes.
And I go through different phases of sometimes thinking how brilliant that is, and then also thinking, but it's also, it's a bit of a cheat because every time he comes along, Dickens can simply say that thing again, and you can think, oh yes, how vividly he's presented. There he is again.
Yes, it is a question of technique, but I mean, for me, I think the objection that says that Dickens is too interested in grotesque suggests that humanity is a great mass of indistinguishable ordinariness, punctuated with an occasional grotesque, and Dickens is only interested in the grotesques. For me, those people are so vivid because Dickens sometimes turns his eye on a particular person. It doesn't really matter who you turn your eye on. If you look at somebody long enough, they are extremely interesting. And Dickens could be set going by tiny, tiny things, often set into laughter by tiny things. We know that he was a great one for running jokes. If you want to see Dickens's running jokes, I think the best example is what happened after Hans Christian Andersen visited them and stayed rather too long. And Dickens, almost for the rest of his life, Dickens turned that into a joke with his family, the time that Andersen came to stay and wouldn't go. But it could be tiny things. I mean, we know that there was an occasion once at dinner when a young woman who just got married turned to her husband on about 3 places away and said, "Darling," which was a very kind of unusual thing to say to anybody in public. And she just said, "Darling." And Dickens could not stop laughing. For the rest of dinner, he kept thinking it. He kept just going, "Darling," and then falling over laughing. And I think the novels are full of wonderful moments when the light of Dickens's attention just falls on a particular person, and they just do one thing incredibly vividly, and they're there forever. And the classic example, I think, is the boy the young man in our mutual friend who says "Esker." And I think we've all been there. And what it is, it's a dinner at the Veneerings, who are a rather awful social climbing couple. And they invite a French musician to dinner he looks a little bit like Liszt. I think he's supposed to be Liszt. And there's a young man who's invited to dinner for the first time at the Veneerings. We don't know anything about him at all, except that at one moment he just feels that he ought to contribute to the conversation. And he just leans forward and says, "Esker?" And then he can't go on. He's run out of French. He sings back. And the musician goes, "Est-ce que quoi?" And we never hear any more of the young man who says Esker. That's it. It's just 2 lines. But it's wonderful. And it's like the full beam of Dickens's attention has... I think actually the human race is probably a little bit grotesque to Dickens.
You're right about the running joke. I mean, the bit you read, was it Mr. Wilfer is called the aged cherub, or the...
Yes.
Yeah. And that is a sort of... It is as if a normal novelist,
yes,
dare I say it, any novelist writing now would think of that joke, perhaps,
yes,
and smuggle it in once.
Yes.
But Dickens, having thought of it, is never going to let you forget it,
no,
is he?
But often those running jokes, they're a source. They actually accumulate emotion as they go, and they start by being funny, and they get funnier and funnier, and then after a while, suddenly, great depths of emotion come out of it. And I think the example here is. In Great Expectations, which is just a masterpiece of rehandling small phrases. And one of them is the aged P, Wemmick's wonderful father. I love Wemmick's wonderful father. But the other one is what Joe says to Pip all the time when he was a small boy, which is, "We're going to go out and, Pip, what larks?" And it's such a kind of warm, human thing. And then at the very end of the novel, when Pip's been very ill, and he comes round from his illness, and there's Joe, very unexpectedly, and he's been looking after him in his sick room. And Joe just says, "When you're better, Pip, we'll go out for a drive, and believe me, what larks." And oh my days, you cry when you get there. Really do. It's that kind of little tag that he just sees so much more in than the ordinary novelist, I think.
I mean, I would ask you whether I'm tempted to ask you whether you sort of, as a novelist yourself, kind of copy such things. But of course, I mean, one of Philip's more recent novels, The Mulberry Empire, is almost a sort of exercise in copying, actually. Yeah. I mean that as my sister-in-law would say, I mean that in a good way. I mean that in a good way. And indeed, some copying of Dickens. Yeah. And there's the odd Mrs. Meagles, one of his characters actually gets into it. And
Mrs. Lirriper.
Yes, okay. And you even have the gall to copy what has already been mentioned several times as one of the great sort of set-piece Dickens in full flow passages, the famous opening of Bleak House where not a finite verb appears, the fog, and Philip copies that in I mean,
as Stravinsky says, small talents borrow, great talents steal.
Yes. I mean, is Dickens a kind of suitable novelist for contemporary writers to copy from, or is he just, in his righteousness and in his confidence, is he too remote, really?
Well. People have tried to do Dickens before. I always think of that passage in the Warden where the novelist descends on the poor of the parish and write a sickeningly sentimental novel about them. I don't know, actually. I think sometimes you just do something as a novelist which you don't ask about ethically or aesthetically in advance. It just seems so much the right thing to do at the time that you think, oh, well, there'll be time to examine this afterwards.
But there are lots of novelists who've done recently, including Dame Antonia in living memory, who've done what you do in your own way in the Mulberry Empire, which is to sort of descend on the 19th century, really. And You know, there are lots of examples in recent British fiction, Sarah Waters, Mitchell Faber, where there seems an interest amongst novelists, including yourself, in going back to a kind of Dickensian world, not just as a setting, as an historical novel, but actually in some ways sort of borrowing, parodying, or pastiching the kinds of things people used to write in the 19th century. I mean, a cynical reading would say that we have a kind of, we have a sort of a yearning for a world in which, as we've been hearing, you know, novels mattered, novels were the pulse of the nation, novels gave you the condition of England. Do you think that's true?
Well, certainly with this one. I mean, there's a number of ways to approach that. Firstly, I have to say that I never really liked historical novels as a reader, and I think the reason that I didn't like them was that they were written in the language. They're often written in the language of the present about the experiences of the past, and for me that gave an uncomfortable feeling that the novel knew better than the characters. For me, I know that a lot of people love this novelist, but for me, the example that I just can't live with is Patrick O'Brian, who wrote a lot of novels about the Napoleonic War. And he's always apt to say a character goes into a room and a string quartet is playing Arriaga's first string quartet in C major opus 3, and you just think nobody would have known that in the room. So I felt that if I was going to write a novel about the 19th century, it was going to be in the style of a 19th century of 19th century language. I didn't want to use words even that the 19th century wouldn't have used. And then as I started getting into it, I started to become dissatisfied with the idea of a sort of generalized 19th century style. And then I thought, well, I can only see the 19th century through the eyes of individual writers. And I thought for a while, shall I write a whole novel in the style of Dickens? And actually writing the chapter in the style of Dickens made me realize how much I am within, like most English writers, I am within what we referred to yesterday as the Dickens community. It was, after a bit, it was sort of uncanny. You just kind of switched off and it just came out, not in a sort of Ouija board sort of way, but just because you're absolutely steeped in the rhythms of Dickens, you know what he would have said. And probably there are phrases there that just stuck in my mind, and sometimes it's just the rhythm. So the pastiche, I didn't start from the point of thinking I'm going to write a pastiche. I sort of backed into that position. The other thing was the question of the topic and the seriousness with which the novel was taken in the 19th century. And with this one, I did want to. It's about the first Afghan War, which was the first really huge disaster that the British Empire suffered. They blithely went into Afghanistan thinking, oh, this will be easy. And 4 years later were chased out. And I think actually the whole army, bar one or two soldiers, was killed by the Afghans. An experience which pretty well everyone who's invaded Afghanistan since has found out. Anyway, I was writing, I don't know why I suddenly thought I'm going to write a novel about the first Afghan War. This was in the mid to late 90s. And for a while, people kept saying to me, why are you writing a novel about Afghanistan? I said, I don't know, it just seems, And then suddenly, September the 11th happened, and my novel came out about 3 weeks later, and suddenly there was a war in Afghanistan. So I thought, well, I don't know, it must have been somehow in the air.
You should know, by the way, anybody here hasn't read, it's actually very naughty, this novel, really. It's very, very naughty, because although I think most of us would recognise on page 39 the pastiche of Bleak House, it's actually all pastiches.
Yeah.
And it's mostly pastiches of things that Philip's read, but we haven't. And And it's very, very naughty because actually one or two unfortunate, and I think very naughty, one or two unfortunate reviewers got to the book before the news went round that actually it was all pastiches, and solemnly reviewed it as a kind of, you know, a deeply relevant historical novel which explored, you know, imperialism and its discontents, as it were. Yeah. And then I remember the first review came out which sort of said, actually, the whole book is pastiches of 19th century writers, and you can go through and sort of tick them off. And I remember somebody going, oh my God, you know, call back the copy sort of thing, you know. So it is a bit naughty, isn't it?
It's a bit naughty.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you what...
Because in Antonia's, in possession, yes, when you get the pastiches, they're all set off, so you can see them.
Yes.
And not get sort of too tricked, but...
I'll tell you the high point of naughtiness of the book. This is really bad. You will be shocked at this, as if you're employed in a university, and I hope it never gets back to my university that I did this. You always love a minor character in a novel, and you become crazily fond of them. I don't know why. It's always a very minor character. And with this one, it was a man called Frampton, and he was a junior officer. And all he did, he came on from time to time. He couldn't pronounce his R's, and he would just go, frightfully bad show, and then wander off again. And I don't know why. I just grew really fond of him, and I looked forward to him coming on so I could make him say, frightfully bad show, and go away again. And then, towards the end of the book, it occurred to me that Frampton was going to have to be killed, because they were all killed. I couldn't let, you know, this one really minor character. And I thought, I can't do this to Frampton. I really like him. So I thought, I'm going to make it up to him. And I had to kill him. The day I killed Frampton was such a sad day. I had to go out for a walk. But I thought, I'll make it up to him. And what I did, I put a little, because the book is actually not a very accurate version in some ways of the First Afghan War, I put a little bibliography at the back of the book, and I said, you know what, you can go and read these books about the First Afghan War if you want to find out what the true story is. And I thought, I know, I'm going to let Frampton write a book. So I put into the bibliography a totally non-existent book by Frampton called... And it's called A Peep into Afghanistan. Sorry, I know it's absolutely disgraceful.
Well, there's also something which is rather disgraceful in the book, which I think you didn't mean mischievously.
Okay.
Okay, but I don't know. Which is one of my great sort of favourite collector's things is anachronisms in great literature, you know, clocks endlessly striking in Julius Caesar, all that sort of thing. And people, my favourite is Anne Radcliffe, the great sort of the progenitor, really, of Gothic novels, who have people sitting around in the sort of 16th century in coffee houses in Venice, you know, eating croissants and things. In the Mulberry Empire, the protagonist, Alexander Burns, is travelling. He's an intrepid imperial Scottish traveller, and he's travelling in Afghanistan at one stage, and he sees something very odd in the sky. And it's a jet plane.
It's a jet plane.
And it's not that he sees something he doesn't understand and we're left to infer what it is. You actually tell us.
It's a jet plane.
It is a jet plane.
It's a jet plane.
Yeah, and I thought that was a bit naughty, really. And what was that all about?
It's at the end of the second part.
Yes.
And I can't really explain it, but sometimes you just have a very visionary experience of what the novel must do at a certain point. And it was what Valery says, Paul Valery, he says that you must wring the neck of eloquence. And I thought at that point, I must just take the whole illusion of the novel and break its neck, just like that. And I don't know why. I didn't know why. I couldn't understand it. And I it was absolutely baffling to me, but it was absolutely clear to me that that was what the novel must do at that point. And then, of course, when the novel came out, it took on rather a chilling aspect, because it says specifically not just that he sees a jet plane in the sky, but he sees a jet plane going westward. And then September the 11th happened, and I thought, perhaps, I don't know, there's something strange going on here. And actually something else happened to a very good friend of mine at the same time. It's my friend, the composer Thomas Adès, who I wrote an opera with years and years ago. And the New York Philharmonic wrote to him and said, would you like to write a piece for the millennium that we can perform on January the 1st, 2000. We're asking 8 brilliant young composers. And 7 of the brilliant young composers wrote variations on Leonard Bernstein's Condido, which are with lots of cymbals and drums. And Tom wrote a piece called America, a prophecy set to ancient Mayan texts, which go, this is absolutely the case. It goes, we are coming for you, your cities will burn, you will die. And he said, I said, what were you thinking of? What were you thinking of, spoiling their party like that? And he said, it was a chilling atmosphere afterwards. And the piece has hardly ever been done since, but he just said, I don't know, I just felt I had to do it. And sometimes some kind of weird thing seems to be in the air. Now, I don't claim any kind of great prophetic powers, but I've never had such a powerful indication that at this point Burns must go into the country, and he must look up and he must see a line in the sky and he must know that it's a jet plane.
I thought, I had an ignoble suspicion.
Oh, yeah.
It's on page 381, and I thought you might have put it there to see if any of the reviewers were going to...
Oh.
Because novelists do this sort of thing. Antonia.
He was talking to me a long time before that, saying, shall I put it in or shall I not put it in? He was staying with me and he said, I have an idea that I have to put in a jet plane. And that was before.
Thank you, Antonio. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure you would please. Also, I will say that I don't know what your ethics are as a book reviewer, but I'm happy to say that I believe that all book reviewers read novels to the very end on all occasions.
Yeah, although the interesting thing is they're never allowed to talk about the end, are they? But I mean...
No, that drives me up the wall. It drives me up the wall. There's a strange convention that you can't give away the plot, even of... very kind of non-plot-driven novels. I was reviewing Judith Herrmann's Alice for the Guardian, and they made me take out a detail of the plot. And I thought, no one's going to read this book to find out what happens at the end. It's absurd.
Now, Philip, you want to do a reading from one of your own books,
yep.
And not the one that we've been talking about.
I will read through.
No, you do. So tell us a bit what you are going to.
Well, this is my new book, and it's also a book with a kind of Oriental setting. Do we say Oriental setting anymore? Probably not. Well, it's set in Asia, and it's about a. It's set against the background of the Bangladesh War of Independence, and it's narrated by a small boy who is born months before the outbreak of the War of Independence, and it's his family memoir, what they did as they came through it. And I might as well own up now and say, actually, the narrator is my husband. It's kind of the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, without the recipes for marijuana cooking. And the thing that set me off on it was that he's a great storyteller, and he said that that when the war broke out, he was a baby, and all his numerous cousins and numerous aunts and all the rest of it were staying in his grandfather's house. And he was the only baby, and his grandfather decreed that he must not be allowed to cry, because if the Pakistani soldiers patrolling outside the house knew that there was a baby in the house, they would know that there were young women in the house, and they would break in and they would rape the women and they would kill all the men. And this happened to a lot of families. So he's got 6 aunts, and they had a sort of line of feeding him yogurt constantly, and he had a very tranquil war just. And they came out of it all right. So anyway, the novel is set in pre- and post-independence Bangladesh. It's narrated by him. I'm going to read I'll stand at the lectern, actually. I'm going to read a rather Dickensian passage, actually. And it's about Zav's brother Zahid being born. It's a little bit like the beginning of Dombey and Son, except nobody dies. And the aunts are sitting downstairs waiting for news, and the midwives and everybody are upstairs. It's the aunts and the narrator's father. My father stayed in Rankin Street until my brother Zahid was born. He was born upstairs in my grandparents' bedroom. My aunts sat downstairs in a line, handing cups of tea and biscuits to my father, who was quite calm. He was always quite calm. My mother's sisters reacted in different ways to the noises coming from upstairs, the hurrying up and down of the midwife and house servants. I remember when you were born, Dahlia, Ira said. You were so quick arriving. The doctors had hardly got here when there you were, crying. But Pultu, what an age he took, Mary said. Pultu, who was 5, had been hustled away for the day with his father, taken to the law chambers to sit in a corner and play quietly with pen nibs and paper. He could always be distracted in this way, and it was thought it was not good for small boys to overhear the noises of childbirth, whether because it would distress and frighten them, or because they would prove themselves nuisances, I do not know. But Pultu reached his teenage years, as I did, and my brother too, believing that babies were what happened after you were taken as a great treat to Nana's law chambers, playing all afternoon with stationery, inkwells, and the junior clerks. With 5 married sisters and a sister-in-law by the time Pultu was in his teenage years, the day at Papa's, followed by a return home to find a new, tight-swaddled and squashed face niece or nephew, became a regular, sometimes twice-annual event, like a party. Pultu surprised Mama even, Ira said. She said she grew bored with waiting for him. But it was so cold, Nadira said. It was December, and we were all sitting over the fire in sweaters and coats, remember? Papa said he had never known it so cold. Pultu was nice and warm, and he didn't want to come out. All her sisters hid their laughter behind their hands. Don't talk such nonsense, Mary said, on account of my father. But my father paid no attention to anything his sisters-in-law said on any occasion, and he just passed his cup of tea to Mary, who poured him another cup of tea. What are you going to do, Mahmud, after the baby is born? Nadira said. Well, I shall be the baby's father, I suppose, my father said. But that is not a full-time occupation. I expect I shall go on doing just what I have been doing, but with the addition of a small extra person. What did you mean? Mira asked Nadira. I meant whether he and Shiri and the dear little baby are going to stay in Dhaka, Nadira said. I so want to see the dear little baby every day. You can see dear little baby Bubbly every day, Mira said, and you never seem all that interested in her. Oh, baby Bubbly, Nadira said. Bubbly is getting old and fat and argumentative. One of these days she is going to go to school. You mark my words, she's no fun at all. And there's Charmine's baby, Mira said. We go to see pretty little Ejudge once a week. Won't he do? I don't count that the same at all, Nadira said. Can I help you to anything, Mahmud? Mary said. I would like some rosgulai, please, my father said, and my aunt passed him the plate. But I just don't see, Nadira said, why Shiri and Mahmud can't return to Dhaka now they are going to have a baby. Well, people don't stop having babies simply because they have to live in Borishal, Ira said, and that is where Mahmud's job is. He has to be there. But I want them to come back, Nadira says. I want to see the dear little baby every day. Mahmud, can't you leave Shiri here? I'm sure it's bad for her to travel with a baby. Travel with a baby? Ira said, alarmed. What's that noise? Mary said, and it was true. The quality of the noise from upstairs had changed. At the foot of the stairs, a woman stood, smiling. It was the midwife. And though she saw this every day, hundreds of times a year, she had not forgotten that this might be the most important day of the family's lives. And my father's composure now proved itself as thin as a wafer because he rose with a look of transcendence and anxiety on his face. The midwife said that he had a son. She asked him to come upstairs to his wife and child. "Is that the baby?" Nadira said. "Has he really come? Am I an aunt now?" A week after my brother Zahid was born, my father went back to Borishal. My grandfather in person went down with him to the Dhaka port at Shadowghat, where the tottering white four-storied launches to Borishal and other river towns departed. This was not a common thing to happen. My grandfather left his daughter and baby grandson at home and ceremonially escorted Mahmud to the port. There was something in his behaviour that expressed some retrospective dissatisfaction with his first grandson, his son's child. But my grandfather was always the sort of person who would enjoy the children of his daughters more. But for the moment, Nana would not have walked Laddu to the end of the road to get a rickshaw. There was grand and beneficent quality about his taking my father to the Borishal launch on this occasion. It was something to do with the new baby, Zahid, sucking contentedly in the warmth of his grandfather's house in Rankin Street, turning his face with interest to the light falling through the mango leaves, or just idly basking with cross-faced assurance in the constant love, curiosity, and excitement of his 6 aunts. The 6 aunts, particularly the smaller ones, were constantly waking up from sleep to try and make him give them a smile and a kiss at this time of his life. They wanted him to confirm their belief that he was very dark and very clever, which Zahid did by blowing a bubble on his own and giving them a very stern look at being woken up.
You said it's like Dombey and Son without the death, but actually I was just thinking that birth's almost always associated with death in Dickens, isn't it? It's not this.
Well, I think it was often like that. You know, I think it was a moment of great terror, really, that someone was giving birth. I don't know what the death statistics were, but I don't think it was an unusual thing at all to wonder whether your wife or your sister was going to come through this ordeal alive.
And we were talking a bit earlier about how, I mean, you'd wonder if you can use the word Orient, but you're going off somewhere that's not Britain for this novel. The Mulberry Empire is about empire and about the relationship between colonial powers and distant lands. I mean, we were talking before about how, in a peculiar way, that relationship between Britain and the Middle and Far East is born in Victorian England, and Victorian fiction's full of empire and imperialism. Yeah. But Dickens isn't really, is he?
No, he should have been a bit more interested, I think. Let's tick Dickens off for once. There should be more interest in the empire than Mrs. Jellyby and Borya-Bulagar, I feel. I would have loved Dickens to have written a novel which had something to say about India. Even if it's like India in Vanity Fair, because it's such an interesting subject. But I don't know, there just seems to be very unexpected moments where Dickens's mind just shuts off. He's just not interested, and we're struck much more by those moments, I think, because otherwise his interest in almost everything is pretty well unbounded.
Yes. So why do you think that is? I mean, you sort of think maybe Mr. Dombey does some dealing with the empire, but you never know. You never know anything about where his money comes from, or
no. I think that it's one of those things where Dickens was just ready to find things funny, and almost before he'd engaged with it at all. And I think there is one moment where I do grow very impatient with Dickens, and it was Tagore's father, Rabindranath Tagore's father, was a remarkable man, very intelligent, very well read, and he came to England, he met all sorts of people, and he managed to come and see Dickens. And all Dickens says about this in his letters is that a man came to see him with the name Dwarkanath Tagore. And Dickens can't believe that anything so hilarious has happened to him, that someone called Dwarkanath Tagore has come to see him. But I wish he'd actually talked to him and told us what he had to say about, Bengali culture. It's maddening that actually the only thing that struck him was that somebody might call their child Dwarkanath.
I think we got to the stage where I can invite audience participation. There's a lady at the...
I think it may be a confidence question.
Oh, hang on, the mic's coming. The mic's...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we want the mic.
I think it might be a confidence question. The reason why he didn't write about India, he wrote mainly about London, and he hated London, but that was sort of his...
That's his territory.
That was his territory. You think maybe he just didn't have the confidence to write about other countries, because he did write a bit about France and a bit about other countries, but maybe they weren't quite so good, those passages, as some of his... I don't know if I'm allowed to say that one.
I don't know. I think... well, there's a tale of two cities, isn't there? And the beginnings of Little Dorrit, I think, is... It's true that the foreigners, particularly when they're villainous foreigners, they tend to fall into the same few lines. No, I don't know. I think
Australia features, doesn't it? You get sent to Australia if you've fallen.
Yeah, we don't.
But that's
really...
a 19th century thing. Mrs. Gaskell sends them to Canada, and they...
Yeah. And we don't really know very much about Australia from Great Expectations, do we?
About the landless children in his last book, are they Egyptians or Indians?
Oh, yes. People go off to Egypt. You're quite right.
And then he's saying things like sundry natives whipped to death. Perhaps he might have written about Africa or India, and perhaps you might not have liked it.
Yes.
It might have been unpleasant.
Yeah. I think if he'd lived another 5 or 10 years, I think he would very likely have yielded to temptation and gone to Australia. He was invited to Australia. I don't think he found the time, but I think he would have gone. I think he would have found something interesting.
Because Melanie's right. In Thackeray, who does have people from the colonies in Vanity Fair, and it's quite embarrassing and awkward for them, because Thackeray's basically a good guy, I think. He's a good guy. He's a humane, liberal, decent, funny, satirical person. But we have to apologise for what he does, with people of colour in his novels. Yes. And perhaps it's a relief that that Dickens didn't.
Yes, you might.
I'm not sure. Does he hate London, though, Louise? Does he? I'm not sure he hates London.
He had a love-hate relationship. That London was his sketchbook, but he couldn't wait to get away from London, and that's why he was always walking and always taking days off and always trying to get away. But he actually really couldn't stand it, and he did describe London as a sewer or something.
Yeah.
So.
But there's a great tradition, isn't there, of writing, which Dickens in a way established, of writing these kind of extraordinary descriptions of London, which is, it is an interesting place. And I remember I was teaching some course to undergraduates in which they were reading books about London, and one of them was a wonderful novel by Martin Amis called Money, which is sort of has great kind of amazing over-the-top descriptions of bits of London. And one of the students was saying, this guy is just wonderful. He just shows how horrible London is. And I said, he lives on Regent's Park Road. He's there all the time. It's not really hatred. It's kind of a great sort of flowering of sort of delightful, satirical, almost self-indulgent writing, which could only be written by somebody who sort of lives in London, actually.
Yes.
He really hated America.
Yeah.
He did in America in Martin Chuzzlewit.
Yes. He made his peace with America, though, didn't he, when he came to the reading tours?
On his second tour.
On his second tour, yes. That was all right, yes.
And he gave money to Edgar Poe's mother-in-law.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's, yeah. Okay.
Do we have any other? We got Jessa.
Okay.
Just one addition concerning Dickens writing The Empire towards the end of his career. I'm thinking of these scenes in The Mystery of Edwin Drood, in the East End, the opium dens.
Oh, yes.
And, of course, the interface between London, or, Dickens's world, and the heterotopia of the Empire that is never quite addressed. are perhaps these opium dens, for instance, in Edwin Drood, which was not finished. I mean, there are the Chinese and the Lascars and so on. So perhaps Dickens was wandering off not only into opium dreams, you know, caused by something, but also into an interest, strong interest in the empire. Towards the end, what do you think? I mean,
yeah, I think he sees the end result of the empire. He sees what shows up. I think the Chinese in Edwin Drood, I hate to say it, they're a little bit Tintin, aren't they? I mean, it's difficult to imagine them actually saying anything memorable to each other. I have to say that I do worship Dickens and I do love him, but I don't think Edwin Drood works. I think my theory is that after the railway crash, I think that did something permanent to Dickens. I think he lost so much of his energy, and the very late short stories after that are not particularly good. I can't imagine that actually Edwin Drood would have been in the top rank if he'd lived.
So.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been told I mustn't speak louder. I'm supposed to mic. We know something about Dickens's response to what is called the Indian Mutiny, what the Indians call the insurrection or rebellion or the War of Independence, and he was very violent and outspoken.
Yes, he was. Yes.
So, I mean, that is not in fiction. It was probably in household words.
Tell us what he said.
Well, he didn't exactly say exterminate those brutes, but that was the gist of what he said.
Yes, as I say, it's an important lack of sympathy.
Yes.
With Dickens, he just wasn't prepared to send his sympathy out in that direction.
There was no understanding, no sympathy whatsoever for an indigenous rebellion against the British Empire, the British, you know.
No, there wasn't.
Sorry, was that not because his son was in India at the time and it was a kind of reflexive response rather than a sort of considered, maybe, thought about the empire, just that his son was in India at the time?
I suppose it was how the so-called mutiny was reported in the British media at the time. And that was, of course, very one-sided.
I absolutely...
In addition to what you've said about his son.
Yeah. I think it's a curious... It's very unpredictable, the ways in which in which these things are going to be reported by Victorian England. The mutiny, you're absolutely right, was just reported in a way totally lacking in any kind of sympathy or trying to understand what had happened. On the other hand, the way that they wrote about the first Afghan war, where the Afghans succeeded in killing a whole army, is actually more that of a worthy military adversary in an odd way. And one of the books that I relied on quite well was the biography of Dost Muhammad, the Afghan military leader. It was written by an Indian who was attached to the British called Mohan Lal. And it's very easy to find copies of this book because it was a favourite leaving gift in British public schools in the 19th century. And it's a very admiring biography saying this is the success of Dost Muhammad's campaign, which is extraordinary, really. But the mutiny, I don't know, it did awaken something in the British response that was not rational. And you can see it. I mean, you can see it in. It's almost unimaginable when you get to that moment when Dickens says, "I think they should all be exterminated," because you can't imagine him ever saying such a thing about anybody.
We got time for one more before we scuttle off to lunch, I think. Yes, lady there. Oh.
What we perhaps see in Dickens is a great deal of conflict with regard to these colonies. I mean, one remembers even in Great Expectation, after all, that Pip saves his friend Herbert, you know, and their business is in the Middle East, and we're not told much about that either.
Right.
But I think this is part of the question of what Dickens would write today, you know, this conflict. In the sense that all these writers, these great writers like Gaskell, Carlyle, I mean, thought of emigration as a solution. And they didn't think beyond that. And today, we still have the migration of people, and we still have this conflicted attitude, I think, towards what is actually happening around us in the Middle East, for example, or in North Africa. So I think this is part of the big question of what Dickens would write today.
I think I want to answer the question of what would Dickens write today, and I don't think that's answerable. I think the circumstances which produced Dickens is just not going to be repeated anytime soon. I think the interesting question is, where would a Dickens be writing today? I think that it isn't going to be in Europe. I think that the next Dickens is going to come out of a society with drastic inequalities, with sufferings, with things to be put right, where everything seems to be up for grabs. 3 or 4 years ago, before the Chinese Olympics, a torch was run through London, and there were huge protests. People tried to grab the torch. It had to be protected by a lot of brutal Chinese bodyguards. And afterwards, the Chinese ambassadress, wretched woman, she said to the press, "I was astonished to see such scenes happening in the country of Jane Austen and of Dickens." And I thought, and I might even have written in the paper, Dickens hated oppression. He hated he would have hated your society. He would have been on the side of the protesters. He would not have been on the side of people running a torch with security guards smashing their fists into the faces of protesters. So for that reason, my answer to the question, what would Dickens write today, is no. Where would Dickens write today? Where is the next Dickens going to arise from? And I think it's in China.
Well, there you go. That's absolutely, we can't contradict him, can we?
No, it's undisprovable.
Philip always has been the master of the art of uncheckable prophecy, and then that's a good way to send us off for our refreshments, and we'll thank you very much, Philip, for your prophecies and everything else.